Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through the planetary transits or Gochara for February 2023. Before we get too far along, please note the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And then you might go ahead and take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. So here are the dates in February when things are going to be shifting in the sky. We don't actually have much going on in the way of slow-moving planets. That tends to be what Jyotish or Vedic Astrology tends to emphasize. If you're interested in that kind of thing, the slow-moving planets actually last month, January, was a big month in terms of all that, so you might take a look at the video I did for last month. But in terms of February, so just a few days ago, February 2nd, Mercury entered Capricorn or Makara. And then February 5th, again, just a few days ago, that we had a full moon in Cancer in the nakshatra Ashlesha. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then just yesterday, February 7th, Venus entered Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra. And then coming up in a few days, the Sun is going to enter Aquarius or Kumbh in Sanskrit. And then a couple days later, Venus is entering Pisces or Meena on February 15th. On February 18th, Venus will enter Uttar Bhadrapada, which is another nakshatra. So a lot of this month is actually going to be about star astrology, more about nakshatras and signs, rashis. And actually, nakshatra astrology is actually considered the oldest part of Jyotish. I find it extremely useful, although some people don't really emphasize it. And just to give some context here, on February 18th as well is going to be Shivaratri if you're celebrating that. On February 20th, there's going to be a new moon in Shatabhisha nakshatra. On February 24th, Mars is going to enter Mrigashirsha nakshatra. Also on the 24th, Jupiter will enter Revati nakshatra. So again, it's all about nakshatras this month, primarily. And then the 27th of February, Mercury is going to enter Aquarius. The next day, Mercury is going to go asta or combust. And then on February the 28th, so the same day, Venus will enter Revati, another nakshatra. And just a few days later, on March 6th, again, if you're celebrating, is when Holi is, which is often considered the beginning of the new year by some people. So let's talk about all this. So let's talk about Mercury first. February 2nd, Mercury entered Capricorn or Makara. So Capricorn is a friendly sign to Mercury because it's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn and Mercury are friends. So Mercury does pretty well in this rashi, this sign. The thing about Capricorn is that it's a earth sign, so it's a very pragmatic sign. And also because it's ruled by Saturn, Mercury is going to be sort of in engineering mode, I would say. Taking a long view, taking a deep view, really, this is not a place in which Mercury, for example, which is a planet that represents analysis and decision making. This is not going to be a time for snap decisions or kind of, how would I say, sort of impulsiveness. Impulsive decision making is going to be more practical in nature. And then Mercury is going to stay in Capricorn most of the month of February, so it's going to be in that mode for quite a while. And then February 27th, right before the end of the month, Mercury is going to enter Aquarius or Kumbh. Aquarius is also friendly to Mercury because it's also ruled by Saturn. But it's different than Capricorn because it's an air sign. So it's, when we're talking about air signs, it's air is all about ideas and, the mental space and that sort of thing. So we're going to be moving from Capricorn, which is very pragmatic, day in, day out, potentially even sort of a grind, really, to something more innovative, something more forward or progressive, natured. Even though it's still going to be slow. Again, it's still ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is also ruled by Saturn. So there's still going to be slowness and sort of methodical nature, but it's kind of like the difference between mechanical, like a Capricorn person might be more of like a mechanical engineer, and Mercury Aquarius would be something more like an aeronautical engineer, NASA scientist, that sort of thing. Because you still need to do all the calculations and all that sort of like laborious calculating and all this sort of thing to get your little spaceship to Mars or whatever. But the sort of like, there's still this sort of like dreaminess about Aquarius that, whereas Capricorn tends to be more pragmatic, sort of the, more sort of like blue chip banker type is what I think of Capricorn, versus Aquarius, which is a little bit more Star Wars and NASA, if that makes sense. So then the day after, on February 28th, Mercury goes asta or combust. So what that means when a planet is asta or combust, it means that it's very, very close to the sun, usually within 10 degrees of the sun. And because it's so close to the sun, it basically gets eclipsed by the light of the sun. And what that means for the planet, and the things it represents, is that the outward picturing of the planet is sort of burnt up, and you may not be able to see it, just like you can't see the planet in the sky. Because you have to remember that, Jyotish primarily, although there's been some innovations since its origin, it's a practice. It's a practice that's over 5,000 years old before the technology. So a lot of these sort of sky phenomenon are based on what the eye can actually see. And so they noticed that, Mercury at some points, when it got too close to the sun, kind of disappeared in the sun's light. So what does that mean? So Mercury can represent different people. So like aunts, uncles, friends, neighbors, sort of acquaintances in a way, also. And so when Mercury goes combust, you might have like a friend that goes on a trip that you don't see for a while, that sort of thing. So again, the outward picturing. Mercury can also represent games. So maybe you'll have, like if you're a soccer player or something, your game might get canceled or delayed. It can also be communications and travel. So you might have some monkey wrench thrown into those things during this time. So it's not as easy to communicate or travel. Like maybe you lose your phone or something like that kind of thing. But at the same time, the inner qualities that the planet represents are stronger. So Mercury's, the planet that represents analysis and contemplation and decision making. So once Mercury goes asta at the end of the month, you might find yourself generally in more of an introspective or thoughtful space, like really considering things thoroughly, weighing your pros and cons, that sort of thing. So that's going to be where Mercury is in sort of the decision-making, rational, analytical mind for the month of February. And I just mentioned Aquarius. Let's get into Aquarius a little bit because we're going to have, a bunch of planets moving into that rashi or sign. So Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is the slowest moving planet. It's also the most distant planet that you can see with the naked eye. And so it's a planet its qualities are sort of cold and distant and slow. And that's the kind of energy or nature of Saturn. As I mentioned, Aquarius is an air sign, so it's really all about ideas and the mental space. But it's a fixed sign, so what that means is that people who have Aquarius as their lagna, or rising sign, or ascendant, those are all different words for the same thing. These people tend to be pretty fixed in their position, especially a mental position for Aquarius. which is good in a way, because you need, like, your NASA scientists. I mean, they do years and years of calculations to, send spaceships, to outer space, that sort of thing. So you need somebody who's going to, like, see things through and persevere. But at the same time, somebody like this may have a hard time switching gears. So that's a downside potentially. The symbol of Aquarius is a man carrying a pitcher on his shoulder and pouring out the liquid or contents, water or whatever's in there. For somebody who is an Aquarius, Lagna, rising, ascendant sign, this is kind of a symbol that they enjoy gathering knowledge, especially because Venus is lord of the 4th and the 9th houses, or bhavas, and the 4th house represents like undergraduate education, and the 9th house represents things like higher education, like masters, potentially masters or PhD or doctorate level work. And in the 9th bhava, Saturn, which rules this chart, rules the chart of Aquarius, is exalted. So you're going to have a lot of stick-to-itiveness and perseverance in terms of higher education, potentially for an Aquarian person. Aquarian people tend to be more interested in science and spirituality, because the 9th house also represents spirituality. But Saturn and Venus are sort of materialists as far as planets go. If you had something like Jupiter, that might be something different. People who are Aquarian lugnas, they tend to have lots of gains and losses, because Saturn rules the 1st house and the 12th house. So the 12th house is loss and expenditures, that sort of thing. And the 1st house is kind of self. Also, the 11th natural house of Aquarius, is the lord of it is Jupiter, and Jupiter is a very benefic planet. So folks who are Aquarian usually pretty interested in socializing. The 11th house represents things like clubs, groups, society, that sort of thing. The other thing is that there can be issues with siblings for Aquarians, because Saturn is debilitated in the 3rd house, or 3rd bhava. That's Aries, that's Aries. It's ruled by Aries. So there might be some like timidity, because the 3rd house also represents courage, and Saturn is, again, cold, distant, calculating. So there may be issues there, actually, with courage, and also detraction by siblings of some sort. The other thing is that Rahu, the north node of the moon, is considered co-ruler of Aquarius. And, Rahu and Ketu both are actually known for being kind of unusual, a bit eccentric, but you may not notice that about these people right off, because, again, they're ruled by Saturn, and Saturn tends to be more introverted. They would probably sort of like hide their eccentricities if they're able to. So again, this is the world of Aquarius, and so you can see this is sort of energy that the planets are going to pick up on in different ways as they move through this area of the sky during February. So the moon, what's the moon doing in February? On February 5th, we just saw this, the moon was in Cancer, its own sign. It was a full moon in Ashlesha nakshatra, and I'll go through that. So again, whenever there's a full moon, like, it's bright, it's got a lot of light, reflected by the sun. So it's juicy, robust, bright, clear. The moon represents things like intuition, sensuality, creativity. It's a culmination point. It's sort of like the buffet table. A full buffet table of delights is kind of a nice full moon. So especially if you have a full moon or fullish moon in your chart, again, or other things that can affect it. But generally, a full moon is considered a source of strength for a chart or a person. So Ashlesha nakshatra, the symbol of this is a coiled serpent. The deity of this is Sarpas, or a divinized serpent. So snakes. We're talking about snakes here. So there can be, things that people typically associate with snakes with this nakshatra. So they can be wily, creepy, hypnotizing. They can entwine around their victims. There's this kind of secrecy because snakes usually hide out in like caves and pits and things. Like they're not out on the surface typically. They're also misunderstood. I mean, snakes are part of the ecosystem. They have they do good things in the ecosystem, but I would say probably a lot of people, myself included, are sort of irrationally afraid of snakes. Who knows what that's about, but and they tend to be out of sight. So again, you're never quite sure what a snake is up to. They sort of like pop out like surprisingly out of nowhere. There can be insincerity associated with this nakshatra, avarice, deception, cold-bloodedness, poisonous or painful bites. I've noticed that people who have certain placements in the Ashlesha, certain planets, those folks can have like sort of sudden, unexpected, strange events happen to them. Like somebody that comes to mind is Kobe Bryant. He was an NBA player, basketball player, and he died in a helicopter crash. I think that's when Saturn shifted into Capricorn. That might have been 2-3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago maybe, January. It's just out of the blue. But what's interesting about it, so again, he just died in this very strange, unusual, bizarre, sudden manner. But the interesting thing about him is when I don't really follow basketball or basketball players, but I was reading up on him a little bit, and apparently that was kind of like his thing, was like he was sort of known as like the snake or something like that, and people loved to watch him. They were hypnotized by this guy, mesmerized by him. So he had quite a bit of Ashlesha energy. Who else has Ashlesha? Oh, Whitney Houston. She also has Ashlesha energy. Mesmerizing person. Died suddenly, tragically. I think she drowned in the bathtub in a hotel, maybe because of a drug overdose or something like that. Who else has Ashlesha? Oh, Marilyn Monroe. Another, again, we're still looking at her. Decades after she's passed, we're still mesmerized by her. So anyway, that's kind of, you kind of get the vibe of Ashlesha. What else? But they can be very wise, cunning, insightful. There's this concentration, energy, power, sexuality. They can have a blunt character. Again, sort of like what I mentioned, sudden disruptions can happen depending on which planets are in this nakshatra or lunar house. And it can indicate people who deal with poisons, people like chemical engineers, druggists, junkies, people who deal with reptiles, people who are self-serving, robbers, manipulators, people who are greedy, politicians, business people, people dealing with sex, and controversial people. So you can see that, and also medicine should be on this list. Hopefully I remember to put that in there. And it's a full moon, so it's a strong moon, and when the moon is full, it's considered natural benefic. So what that means is that with the full moon and Ashlesha, the more positive aspects of this nakshatra are going to be amplified or sort of projected through the full moon. If you had something like Mars in Ashlesha, because Mars is debilitated in Cancer, so it's already debilitated, and then you have this. I mean, depending on what else is aspecting it or not, that can make for a very wily person. You might have to look out for them. So then, towards the end of the month, February 20th, we're going to have a new moon in Aquarius. So we just talked about Aquarius, and specifically Shatabhisha nakshatra. And I don't think I mentioned this because I have been doing several videos. Sometimes I forget to mention, if you're new to all this, a nakshatra is a lunar mansion. There are 27 lunar mansions, and what that means is that it takes about 27 or so days for the moon to rotate through the entire sky, 360 degrees. So if you divide up the sky to about 27 every day, more or less, the moon is going to be in a different part of the sky, and each of those 27 parts is called a nakshatra, lunar mansion. So again, this is the oldest part of Jyotish, as far as I understand it. That's what I've been told. So new moon, any kind of new moon, again, there's no light in the moon, so it's going to be dry, timid, suspicious. This is going to be how the mind goes. Fragile, confusion, and it's a good time for like plowing things under that are no longer serving, and time for planting new seeds so that they can grow as the moon moves through the new cycle and gains light again. So, moon is not strong. It's considered a primary weakness when it's a new moon. And it's going to be in Shatabhisha. The symbol of this is an empty circle. The deity of this is Varuna, the god of waters. And Shatabhisha, again, it's kind of an intense nakshatra, so it can indicate things like separation, containment, things that are hidden, traps, paralysis, alcohol, solitude. But it can be, again, higher-minded depending on what planet is there, if it's a benefic planet, if it's a strong planet, if there are other benefics shining onto whatever planet is in this part of the sky. It can be visionary, meditative, scientific, philosophical, mystical even. There can be major reversals of business. There can be difficult illnesses associated with this. But also astronomy, astrology, electricians. Because again, we're talking about Aquarius, so NASA scientists. So that's where you get that NASA scientist vibe. But again, this is not necessarily an easy nakshatra, depending on what planet is there and the condition of that planet. So there might be kind of new seeds planted in these areas of life. Maybe trying to make a new start in these areas of life is what could be happening at the end of the month. So Venus in February, so February 7th, just yesterday, Venus entered Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra. So again, more star astrology. So the symbol of this nakshatra is the front legs of a funeral cot. So you can see, like, these are like some pretty intense nakshatras for the first part of the month. So sometimes it can also be a man with two faces. The symbol of this nakshatra. The deity of it is Ajayakapada, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, or one-footed unborn, or one-footed goat, which is a form of Rudra. Rudra is a very intense god of the sky and lightning and storms. So he kind of comes around when things need to be sort of, like a tower moment in tarot cards, like electrified and destroyed and turned under to build anew. So again, more intensity here: fire, heat, combustion, right? Catabolic direction of things, two sides or faces. Somebody who's serious, fearful, high-strung, nervous, but a skilled speaker potentially. Angry, impetuous, cynicism, harsh words, greediness. So again, depends on what planet is here. If it's natural malefic, you're going to get more of the malefic energy of this nakshatra. Kind of somebody who's kind of interested in the darker side of life. This is not like typically a rainbows and unicorns type person. Searing pains, falls, injuries, accidents, attacks, punishment. And there can be like penance, remorse, sadness, difficulty with results from actions stemming from this nakshatra. So again, Venus is a planet that represents things like love, loved ones, sociability, vehicles, finance, arts. So you can see that probably as of yesterday, there might be kind of a sort of sudden dark cloud hanging over, or kind of interaction in these areas of life. It can be people associated with death and dying, like morticians or something, people who are cruel in word or deed, excitable, angry people, radicals, fanatics, terrorists, ascetics, black magicians, and people with geriatric or terminal illness. So again, pretty intense, because we're talking about, the front legs of a funeral cot, and, especially since this is all based from India, usually that involves cremation. Not always, but... and so again, Venus is in Aquarius with its ruler Saturn. So this is going to be a Saturn-dominated Venus. So all that kind of cold, distance, slowness, anxiety, depression, cynicism, secrecy, like that's going to be affecting Venus. And the thing too is that Saturn is combust at the moment. So as I mentioned, for combustion for Mercury, you may not necessarily see the outward effects of Saturn here, but it might be deeply affecting somebody's mind. So, thoughts, feelings about Venusian things. So, if this upcoming week, I know Valentine's Day is coming up on February 14th. Like, I don't know, you might actually want to wait till after Valentine's Day to celebrate, because things are going to be shifting quite a bit on February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. So let's just get into that. So February 15th, Venus is shifting signs and entering Pisces, or Mina. So Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is not an enemy to any planet, so most planets do well in Jupiterian signs, which are Sagittarius and Pisces. Venus happens to be exalted in Pisces, so that's going to give Venus strength. And it's in Pisces with Jupiter, so Jupiter is the big benefic, and it's in its own sign. So you have two natural benefics together in Pisces, which is a watery sign, emotional, and it's high-minded. So when you get these two guys together, we're talking about heaven on earth here. Now we're talking rainbows and unicorns. So and it's going to be quite a contrast. I mean, because again, Venus is leaving Aquarius, which has Saturn ruling it in that rashi sign, switching on the 15th to a Jupiterian sign with Jupiter in it. So it's like day and night. So again, you might want to hold off on your Valentine's Day plans till, February 15th or something, or later. Like, do it the next weekend, since it's sort of a midweek holiday, if you're into that kind of thing. Because the week before might be not so pleasant, or not as pleasant, let's say. There can be issues with love leading up to Valentine's Day, which is oh so fun, no? Let's see, and then what happens? Okay, and then on February 18th, so a few days later, once Venus enters Pisces, it's going to enter Uttar Bhadrapada nakshatra. So the symbol of this is the back legs of a funeral cot, and there is a relationship with Purva Bhadrapada. The deity of this nakshatra is Ahir-Budunya. Ahir-Budunya, hopefully. Something like that. Hopefully, I'm somewhat close. Which is the serpent of the deep. So we've got more snakes here. So the good thing about Uttar Bhadrapada is that it's actually sort of a milder version of Purva Bhadrapada. There is some overlap. So go back to Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra. Check all that out, all that intensity. So the difference here is that people with important planets, placements in this nakshatra, they have an easier time controlling their anger. There's less cruelty, less depraved behavior, more restraint, more benevolent. This can be somebody who's self-sacrificing, somebody who benefits through gifts, donations, inheritance. Again, there's movement, seclusion because of the snake, secrecy, snake energy, solitude, retirement, again, snakes, It can also represent the Kundalini Shakti, which is this energy coiled at the base of the spine that once it's released and travels upward through the chakras can lead to spiritual evolution. Through spiritual evolution, somebody can develop wisdom, knowledge, enlightenment, or siddhis, or spiritual powers. So there's some people with important placements in this nakshatra that are actually great devotees. They end up renouncing the world, especially because it's in Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the natural zodiac, right? It's the 12th house. So it's about release and letting go and loss and, that sort of thing. So especially because you have Jupiter here, which is, considered the planet that represents spirituality, and you have Venus here, and both of them are benefics. You're going to get sort of the nicest energy, kind of the, most benevolent energy, most benevolent form of the energy of Purva Bhadrapada. So, again, that's going to be quite a contrast to the week before. People who are insightful, erudite, intellectual, people who are aware, charitable, people who practice Tantra, or even things like graveyards and cremation, because, again, the back legs of the funeral cot, those things can be indicated by Uttar Bhadrapada. And then at the very end of the month, the 28th of February, Venus enters Revati nakshatra. The symbol of this is a drum marking time. The deity is Pushan, which represents nurturance and safe travel. So this is going to be a pretty different energy. No snakes this time. So Revati nakshatra symbolizes things like time, the marking of time, fanfare, quantum leaps, rose, protection, shelter, so hospitality. So again, in the olden days, it's still true today. But, you would travel on a road and then, take shelter at somebody's house and they'd cook you some soup or something like that, which I guess now you go to McDonald's or, Holiday Inn. I guess that's sort of the commercial version of that. But traveling, a responsible, dependable friend or host, social life. So this is like a social nakshatra, finding things that are lost, breeding, foster care, pediatrics, these kinds of things can be indicated by Revati nakshatra. Clocks and watches, planners, travelers, maintenance crews, again, foster parents and siblings. So traveling, nurturance, and time. So it might be that, around this time, because Venus should be in this area of the sky, moving into March, you might be looking to actually plan some sort of trip. That's very possible. And I'm going to get into it on the next line, but Jupiter will be moving into Revati just a few days before Venus. So it's going to be even more, this sort of generosity, hospitality, and potentially travel energy at the end of the month, moving into March. Either you or your Venus. So your Venus is, again, your art, your vehicle, literally. So travel in your car or boat or whatever you happen to have, airplane if you have one of those. But also like a loved one or your spouse or partner. Could be planning a trip or on the road. So backing up a little bit, just to get into what Sun and Mars and Jupiter are doing. February 12th, Sun enters Aquarius. So again, more Aquarian energy. The Sun's going to be lighting that up and bringing some energy to that space. Saturn, because Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is an enemy to Sun. The Sun isn't super happy in Aquarius, but it's the Sun, so it's got its own kind of power pack that it travels with. And again, it's an air sign, so again, you might get more energy in the mental realm, more insights, more inspiration in the mental realm. On the 24th of February, Mars enters Mrigashirsha nakshatra. Symbol of this is the deer, deity of which is the moon. So there's a story involved with Mrigashirsha, and the story involves pursuit or flight. So Brahma basically fell in love with one of his daughters and was pursuing her, and to avoid her lecherous father, she turned into a deer, ran through the forest. He turned himself into, I think, a stag to chase her down. and then I believe it was Shiva, who basically snipped off his head to kind of keep him from, pursuing the daughter. So anyway, that's kind of the background. But so there can be issues with this nakshatra. It's considered sort of the seeking or searching nakshatra. There's a lot of seeking and searching that happens here. But again, because of this story, this romantic story, there can be disappointment or ill-considered romantic alliances that are associated with this. There can also be sort of a timidity, shyness, nervousness, because, deer are pretty sensitive beings, so that can be there. Again, the constantly searching, seeking, roaming through the forest, that sort of thing. But again, this tenderness, gentleness, sensitivity, journeys, roads, paths. So again, we've got some traveling. We have another planet entering a travel nakshatra at the end of the month. So that might indicate, again, even more likelihood of travel coming up. Paths, hunting, and enchanting, the enchanted forest. There's also, again, because this nakshatra is ruled by the moon, there's this changeability, fickleness, because the moon is always shifting and changing. But people with important placements in this nakshatra can be clever, persuasive, sensual. It can indicate marriage, gemstones, leadership, investigation. Because of the searching, seeking, it can be like research. People are deep into research. But it can also be a suspiciousness and rigidity. People who are involved in sales, people who work with textiles or garments, gem dealers, foresters, people who love animals or work with animals, like vets, poets and lovers, administrators, great thinkers and seekers. That's kind of all associated with this nakshatra. So again, this is going to be Mars. So Mars is an innovative, initiating planet, fiery planet. It is a natural malefic. So I could, but it's like a planet of action. So, again, there might be some new initiatives in these areas of life once Mars shifts into Mrigashirsha. And the same day, Jupiter enters Revati nakshatra, which I just mentioned. So if you want to just plug in Jupiter, which is a planet that represents spirituality and expansion and beneficence, again, Jupiter and Venus are going to be in Revati nakshatra. So time, travel, nurturance at the end of February. So, so that should be interesting. Yeah, it looks like travel's coming up for a lot of us. So, let's download some of these things we've been talking about and look at a chart here. This happens to be the chart of Abraham Lincoln. He was the 16th president of the United States. He's fairly famous, probably one of the most famous U.S. presidents, because he was president during the U.S. Civil War in the 1860s, and also he was the author of the Emancipation Proclamation. I believe he was the author. If not, it was passed during his presidency, which was the document that essentially freed slaves in the United States. In any case, I found his chart, and looky here, he happens to be an Aquarian lugna. So his birth data, he was born February 12th, so he was born in February 1809 in Ogdenville, Kentucky, USA at 6:54 in the morning. So if we look at his chart here, again, when you look at a chart, this is a North Indian style chart. You start at the top diamond there is the rising sign, the ascendant, lugna. These are all different words for the same thing. This is essentially the sign rising in the east as this person is born. So the sign that's just coming up over the horizon, eastern horizon. So it was Aquarius that was coming over the horizon. So his chart is ruled by Saturn. Saturn has gone to the 10th house of work and career, fame. What does he have here? And Saturn happens to be in the nakshatra of Anuradha, which Anuradha is a nakshatra that indicates victory, but victory with not like, victory at all costs, where you make, enemies out of your friends, but you still win the game, sort of. This is a nakshatra where, you're actually you're good at bringing people together and working together and collaborating. So he's got Saturn in that nakshatra. And let's see, the 8th lord. Who is the 8th lord? No, I should fix that. It's actually the 10th lord, so Mars has gone to the 9th bhava, or 9th house. So what that means is that since Mars rules Scorpio, which is the ruler of his 10th house of career and fame and that sort of thing, it's gone to this 9th house of authority and government. So when you have a strong relationship between the 10th house and 9th house, it can indicate somebody who ends up working in government, which is essentially what he did most of his life, before becoming president. He also has Mercury in the 1st house. Mercury in the 1st house is considered a Digbala position, or directional strength, which makes Mercury strong. So that's going to make him very intelligent. He also happens to have a Saraswati yoga. So Saraswati in his chart happens because he's got Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter in the 1st and the 2nd houses. They can be in other houses as well, but for him, they're all in the 1st and 2nd house. So there's going to be some creativity here for him, quite a bit. The other thing is that, he's got, besides being Aquarius, so this is again a personal exemplification of Aquarian energy, but look at this, he's got Venus and Jupiter in Pisces. So which I'm like, well, that's basically what's going on right now in this February, in our February. I mean, this is February 1809, almost 200 years ago. And it just so happens in his chart, he's got Venus and Jupiter in the 12th house, in the 2nd house in Pisces. So Jupiter is against Swa in its own sign with Venus. The 2nd house represents like oration and speaking ability. This was like a gifted person, gifted with words written, gifted with words spoken. That's what he's known for. I actually remember, like, we memorized one of his speeches, like the Gettysburg Address, like when I was in like 3rd grade or 4th grade. Like, I don't know if they're still doing that, but that's how important his written and spoken communication was. He was just gifted. What else is going on here? And as I mentioned, Aquarians tend to be gifted speakers anyway, because Jupiter, is the 2nd house lord. And because it's also the 11th house lord of clubs, groups, societies, again, that kind of fits with this idea that Saturn is an Anuradha. He's going to be a bridge builder rather than like a bridge burner. What else? His Saturn aspects Moon in this chart. And Mars also aspects Moon in this chart. Because of that, he's going to have a lot on his mind. Probably prone to depression, anxiety. I think that's pretty well known, that through his life he was a fairly depressed person. But with Saturn and Mars there, when you have Saturn and Mars together, you typically get somebody who's an athlete. Because Mars is the initiator, it's a fire energy, and Saturn is the one that perseveres. So when you get them together, you get somebody who starts and won't quit. But because it's reflecting in his mind, or on his moon, you're going to get somebody who's kind of an athlete of the mind. So like an engineer, a planner. And that's essentially what he did, was he, crafted the Emancipation Proclamation, as far as I understand, and got that passed through all the people it needed to get passed through to make that a reality. So that's, pretty amazing accomplishment. And then he also has a Kala Sarpa Yoga here. So that's basically basically all the planets are on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis, which he basically has here. Mars is only a few degrees away. So that's going to indicate ambition. And again, Rahu is in the 9th house of authority and government. So that's going to give him even more sort of fire and initiative and spark, especially because Mars is there as well, to really drive into politics. And then also what I did was actually casted a chart for the day the Emancipation Proclamation was passed fully through all the states, because it kind of went in stages, I understand, but I think January 1st, 1863 was when even the states who were fighting it were required to accept it. And this time here is about 9:40 a.m. The reason why that time is there is just because I was orienting this Emancipation Proclamation chart to Aquarius, to kind of, we can compare side by side here. So on the left is Abraham Lincoln's chart, and on the right is the Emancipation Proclamation chart. And it's really quite interesting, actually. So if we look at the Emancipation Proclamation, we see that actually a lot of things that were in Abraham Lincoln's chart are reproduced in this Emancipation Proclamation chart. So Saturn in this chart is in the 8th house, but it aspects 3 houses away. So if you follow that blue arrow, that means that Saturn is aspecting the 10th house again. So this is somebody who's all about the long game in terms of, their thought process and everything regarding their career. And also Rahu is there, so there's still this ambition in terms of career. And then what else? And then we have Jupiter in Libra, and we have Venus in Sagittarius. So what that means is Jupiter is in Venus's sign, and Venus is in Jupiter's sign. So you can actually swap them. We call them exchange of houses, or Parivartana yoga. So that's going to make Jupiter strong and Swa in its own sign again, and Venus is going to be in its own sign. So they're both going to be strong, which is what we had in Abraham Lincoln's chart, because Jupiter was in its own sign and Venus was exalted. So, you're kind of getting the same energy there. And again, this is related to the 9th house of authority and government, politics, and the 9th house of clubs, groups, and society. And you also have, again, this combination of Mercury, Venus, Jupiter. So the creativity planets, communication planets, sociability planets are all, clustered again. So this is going to make for a gifted speaker. Jupiter also happens to be in Chitra Nakshatra, which is the symbol of that is a gemstone, but it's kind of like people are really into architecture and crafting things, which is essentially what he did with this Emancipation Proclamation. We also have Mars in its own sign in the 3rd house, but it's aspecting directly into, again, the 9th house of authority, government, politics. When you get Mars and Jupiter together, Jupiter can be law and legal things. Mars is like the fighter, the initiator, that sort of thing. So when you get Mars with Jupiter, you can get somebody who fights with words, which is essentially what he did. So, and a lawyer, which he also was. So that's all there. And Mars is an Ashwini nakshatra. Ashwini is the first nakshatra of the zodiac, and so it's all about pioneering and saving and rescuing, and that's essentially what he did. Was he crafted a whole new nation based on this Emancipation Proclamation, and raised standards of humanity, really. What else is here? So when you swap Venus and Jupiter here, and Venus lands in its own sign in Libra in the 9th house, that also creates what we call Malavya Yoga, because Venus is in its own house, and either 1, 4, 7, 10, 5, or 9. So anyway, not to get into the technicalities of how you develop the yoga, but it's called a Malavya Yoga, and it essentially indicates creativity and sociability. So again, this is somebody who is, it's just more confluence, basically, of what we're seeing here. Somebody who's gifted speaker, creative, innovative, progressive thinker, but able to build bridges and move, this new crafting, new architecture, political architecture forward, which is, God bless him. So yeah, that's not an easy thing. So here we go, an Aquarian man with Venus and Jupiter in Pisces. So you can sort of, again, get a more concrete personification of these energies that are currently in the sky. So in any case, what you may want to do is check out where Aquarius and Pisces are in your chart, and see, which areas of your life, especially when Venus and Jupiter get together, which area of your life probably is going to get a nice little infusion of positive energy once Venus moves into Pisces on February 15th. So find out, get a chart. You can get them free. Get your chart done free on the internet. They're pretty easy to find. And then figure out which house it is. So 1, 7, 2, 8, whatever. Again, the first house, if you have a North Indian style chart, is at the top, and then you count counterclockwise. And then you can read through this list here. Like the first house is related to self, personality, health, and reputation. So if you are a Pisces rising, you're going to have all this like really nice Jupiterian, Venetian combination energy in your first house of self. And, you're probably going to feel pretty good. The other thing is that you want to look at houses 5, 7, and 9 away from where Pisces is in your chart, because Jupiter aspects 5, 7, and 9 houses away, and Venus aspects directly across 7 houses. So there's actually going to be 4 houses in your chart that are going to be touched, aspected by this like really nice Venus Jupiterian energy. So yeah, enjoy that. So again, you can go through the list here. I'm running out of voice, so I'm not going to read it to you, but you can find out, figure out where your Pisces is, and then count 5 houses away inclusively, and then 7 houses away and 9 houses away, and you'll see which of these houses are gonna, be pretty nice and bright for you, I think, at the second half of the month. Here's, the other houses, 4, 10, 5, 11, 6, and 12. So check those out. So there you have it. Planetary transits for February 2023. Again, this coming week might be a little rough, but things will probably smooth out once February 15th hits, because Venus is shifting into Pisces with a nice Jupiter there. They should be pretty happy together. And then again, it looks like there's going to be some traveling energy at the end of the month heading into March. So thank you for your time. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. I do individual birth chart readings on Zoom. If you're interested in that, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I also have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I discuss things like Ayurveda, yoga, homeopathy, and naturopathic medicine. And the other channel is called Nature Source Care. So in any case, thank you for your time, and all the best as you navigate February. Take care. Namaste.